Selamat datang di Festival Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan 2021. Festival ini adalah ruang sirkulasi pemikiran perempuan Nusantara di ranah seni budaya dengan semangat lintas disiplin, wilayah geografis, budaya, dan generasi. Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan merupakan inisiatif Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan. Dan di tahun ketiga, festival ini dilaksanakan bersama Yayasan Suar Asa Katulistiwa yang berbasis di Pontianak dan Jaringan Translokal Perempuan Pekerja Seni Pertas. Rantau, Settler Colonialism and Transnational Solidarity. Kolonialisme pendatang atau settler colonialism tak dapat dilepaskan dari proyek-proyek imperialisme politik global. Di dalamnya, akumulasi dan peredaran kapital bertumpu pada perampasan dan pemiskinan. Dalam panel ini kita akan mendiskusikan sejarah dan bentuk pengalaman kolonialisme pendatang di tempat-tempat seperti Papua, Australia, dan Palestina. Kita juga akan menelusuri hubungan-hubungan yang telah terbangun dan rute baru solidaritas transnasional dalam perjuangan melawan kolonialisme. Rantau menghadirkan panelis Amira Silmi, Wanimbo, Sara Saleh, dan pemandu Intan Paramaditha. Panduan Etik Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan. Panduan etik ini diterapkan dalam kegiatan-kegiatan Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan atau SPP. Tujuan diadakannya SPP adalah menciptakan ruang belajar dan berbagi yang inklusif, aman, nyaman, dan berani bagi beragam orang yang terlibat di dalamnya, juga bagi lingkungan hidup yang menopang kegiatan SPP. Kami mengajak semua yang terlibat untuk datang dengan keterbukaan dan sikap positif, serta selalu berpartisipasi secara konstruktif selama acara berlangsung. SPP berkomitmen dan berdedikasi untuk menyediakan lingkungan yang terbuka dan bebas dari pelecehan bagi semua orang maupun bagi alam raya. Untuk menjamin itu semua, maka kami tidak akan menerima perilaku-perilaku yang mengandung pemaksaan, pelecehan, dan kekerasan dalam bentuk apapun selama acara berlangsung. Kami akan mengambil tindakan tegas menanggapi pelanggaran-pelanggaran yang terjadi. Tata tertib di ruang acara. Demi kelancaran pelaksanaan Festival Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan, kami mohon kerjasama Anda untuk membaca dan mengikuti beberapa anjuran berikut. Memberi nama akun Zoom dengan nama Anda. Menggunakan aplikasi Zoom versi terkini. Memilih satu bahasa yang ingin Anda dengar. Unmute original audio atau hiraukan pengaturan original audio sehingga tetap bisa didengar. Mengikuti arahan moderator tentang tata cara bertanya atau menanggapi. Tidak menyebarluaskan link, ID, dan password Zoom webinar. Pengelola Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan 2021. Perancang isi dan perencanaan Andi Yentriani, Cecil Mariani, Intan Paramaditha, Lisa Bonarahman, Naomi Srikandi, dan Nyainah Raseki. Sekretariat Margaret Ratih Fernandes. Pengelola ruang pertemuan daring Mitai, Anis Wildani, dan Tiara Sasmita. Penerjemah Pusat Pelayanan Juru Bahasa Isyarat dan Rani Elsanti. Pengelola publikasi Amalia Sekarjati, Nadia Joan, dan Sheridan Olenka Mediana. Terima kasih kepada Sri Wartati, Wikimedia Indonesia, Kolektif Film, Prima Rusdi, Melani Budianta, Yvonne Kristiani, Dianita Kusuma Pertiwi, kawan-kawan media, dan Feminis Temis, serta semua teman-teman yang telah membantu kami merancang dan mewujudkan etalase pemikiran perempuan yang tidak dapat disebutkan satu persatu.
Halo teman-teman, salam harapan. Selamat datang di etalase pemikiran perempuan. Hello everyone, welcome to etalase pemikiran perempuan, or etalase, a feminist festival where we circulate knowledge produced by women in the Indonesian archipelago and beyond. Etalase focuses on arts and culture, with the spirit of crossing disciplinary, cultural, geographical, and generational boundaries. This panel is in English. If you would like to listen in bahasa Indonesia, please click the Indonesian translation button below on Zoom. Some answers will be delivered in Indonesian language. You can write questions for the speakers in English or bahasa Indonesia. My name is Intan Paramaditha. I co-organize this festival with Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, or the School of Women's Thought, and I will moderate this panel today. I'm currently based in Sydney, Gadigal Land, Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Gadigal land on which I live and work. I recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This session is the first international forum of etalase, and we plan to include it in our festival in the upcoming years. We call this forum Rantau, which in Malay language means to travel or to wander. This is our way of traveling in terms of ideas, anti-colonial feminist ideas, to listen to women's knowledge and practice so that we can strengthen our solidarity. We are currently in the middle of a very difficult time due to the pandemic, and we would like to express our condolences to those who have experienced loss and pain. And we'd also like to send our love and prayers to each one of us here today. This global pandemic results from a structure that's exploiting rather than caring, a structure that has also marginalized women, particularly women of color and indigenous women. We hope that this forum allows us to learn from what Maria Lugones calls other resistors. We believe that listening to voices of women at the colonial difference is a way of surviving and keeping the flame alive. The title of this session is Settler Colonialism and Transnational Solidarity. Settler colonialism is inseparable from imperial projects in global politics, where the accumulation and circulation of capital are built upon expropriation and disenfranchisement. A basic definition of settler colonialism is the settlement of what is considered a frontier region by non-indigenous groups. The settler states that we know are the United States, Canada, and Australia, where the population of indigenous people was almost entirely replaced by the settlers' population. And more scholars have included Israel into the discussion of settler colonialism, as the occupation of Palestine was also based on the idea of an empty land like terra nullius in Australia, followed by displacement and dispossession. In the case of Papua, even though Indonesia has always been tied to the discussion of decolonization, whenever people talk about the 1955 Bandung Conference, the non-aligned movement, and the Sukarno's anti-imperialist rhetoric, what we've been witnessing since 1963 and 1969, after the Netherlands transferred the sovereignty of West Papua to Indonesia, there has been a process of colonization. So in this panel, we will look at specific histories and experiences of settler colonialism in places such as Papua, Australia, and Palestine. This panel also explores possible new routes for transnational solidarity in the struggle against colonialism. Today, we are honored to have three speakers. We have Amira Silmi, who's joining us from Berzit, Palestine. She is assistant professor in the Institute of Women's Studies, Berzit University. She has a PhD in rhetoric from the University of California, Berkeley, and MA in gender and development from Berzit University. Welcome, Amira. And we have Rode Wanimbo, our second speaker. Rode was born and grew up in Agamwa, Wamena, Central Highland of West Papua. She is an activist and the head of the women's department of the Gidi Church, or the Evangelical Church of Indonesia. With a collective of women, she engages in the process of decolonizing the Bible. Welcome, Rode. And finally, joining us from Australia, we have Sara Saleh, daughter of migrants from Palestine, Egypt, and Lebanon living on Gadigal land. She is a human rights activist, community organizer, and campaigner for refugee rights and racial justice. Sara is also a poet and a writer. Her pieces have been published in English and Arabic in various national and international outlets and anthologies. So welcome, Sara. Welcome, the three of you. We're really honored to have you here. Okay, so our topics today include, first, we're going to talk about settler colonialism in history, and then we're going to talk about colonialism, experiences and resistance, and finally, we'll talk about ways of building solidarity. I would like to start with Amira. We'll talk about settler colonialism and specific historical contexts. So the idea to start to organize this panel was sparked by what happened in May 2021, the Israeli attacks on Palestine, and that became a global phenomenon. So in Indonesia, Palestine has always had a place in public conversations. And the support for Palestine in Indonesia has been ongoing for decades, actually. And it's often mobilized by the Muslim groups. And conservative Muslim groups in particular frame the case of Palestine as the oppression of Muslims. And this narrative tends to dominate the public sphere. And then on the other hand, we have some secular groups who view that the expression of solidarity for Palestine is mainly a way to strengthen identity politics for the conservative Muslim groups. So they've been asking, well, why caring so much about Palestine when we in Indonesia are faced with blatant oppression in Papua? So we really want to transcend this either or thinking, this oppression Olympics, and really build links for solidarity. So we'd like to start from you. How would you describe Palestine, the case of Palestine, through the lens of settler colonialism? And then perhaps in addition to that, what historical events do we need to know to understand what's going on in Palestine?
So I'll start with question two. And then go back to the settler colonial part. So, Palestine, the official date for the problem of, or what's usually referred to as the question of Palestine, starts in 1948, the Nakba, when the Zionist gangs fought with Palestinian resistance guerrillas and with the Arab armies, and then occupied Palestine and declared their state. But actually, Zionism itself, the problem of Palestine, I think, starts with Zionism. And Zionism started in the previous century with Jewish immigration to Palestine, with different numbers and different waves of immigration, which intensified in the beginning of the 20th century. settlements were built before with the facilitation of the British mandate at the time. Balfour has promised the land, Balfour, the British official who has promised Palestine or a Jewish homeland for the Jews in Palestine. And so from that time, real and clear resistance started against Jewish immigration or Zionist immigration to Palestine, because suddenly this immigration became clear that it is a settler colonial project and not just people who are escaping persecution from Europe and coming to live in Palestine, which would not have been a problem, except that it was a settler colonial project which meant to uproot the people of the land and then replace them with Zionist settlers. So to go back to the first question, the problem of Palestine is a problem of land. The struggle is a struggle for land. And when we say that the struggle is a struggle for land, it will in a way encompass religion, identity, because the land is the base for all of that. It's a way, it's about people's way of living, their mode of being. And if we say with Marx that it is a struggle for land, then it is a struggle for life. And in Palestine, as in the US, as in Australia, in the end, settler colonialism is a project that wants to uproot the people and replace them. And uprooting is not just erasing their physical presence from the land. That's part of it, which happened in 1948. But it's also to dispossess them from the life that they knew. And in writings that I've been working on, like Ghassan Kanafani's writing, Mahmoud Darwish's poetry, we would see that the main thing is the little things of life, the little details of life, and the bigger ones, the land itself, are what is always and has been since 1948 being taken away or appropriated from the Palestinians. That they can, it's about cutting any kind of relation that the people will have with the land. And this has been ongoing since 1948. And, colonialism is inherently linked with capitalism. So uprootedness from the land is a condition for both. But in the settler colonial case, it's the people of the land who should be uprooted. And then settler colonialism will have to plant the settlers in their place. And so this is the difference. But, capitalism will win in the end, even in a settler colonial project. So uprooting is something that is inherent in a colonial capitalist system. And with the separation from the land, there's that need to dispossess the people of their sense of power, their ability to resist any kind of feeling of independence or individuality, and just turn them into a colonized mass. And here, it's not only the Zionists who will be perpetrating this kind of dispossession. Actually, the international community, the international agencies will play this role of turning the colonized into a weakened and helpless mass, stripping them from their rebellious soul and will to revolt. Their cause will be turned into a cause of basic needs under banners of humanitarian aid or in humanitarian interventions. I'll stop here. And then we can maybe the other questions continue.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a lot to take, but I think in terms of the historical event that the main historical event that we in other parts of the world need to understand is the Nakba, the beginning of the dispossession and the uprooting of the people. And I think it's really great that you connect colonialism to capitalism, and that's probably a recurrent theme that Rode will also touch upon. So let's move on to a different context, and we'll get back to you, Amira. So I'll move on to Rode. Could you tell us more about the history of colonialism in Papua from the Papuan perspective? Because this the history is not something that many Indonesians know, and also how do you think the history shapes your understanding of your identity?
Allow me to greet you in the Lani and Walak, two tribes which I belong to. Wa, wa, wa. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the Mamta land, and also I respect the elders past, present, and emerging. To answer your question, Intan, I want to start first by showing a picture. The first picture, please. This is a picture of Bilamo. Bilamo is the home setting in a community of the Walak and Lani. In Bilamo, as you can see in that picture, there are some honai. It's a traditional round house. There are especially honai for men and especially for women, and some honai that living by women as function as kitchen. So this picture shows very clearly that Papuan living in a community. The second picture, please. Most of the activities and work are done together the whole village will come together and make garden, make fences. So, and then also my great grandparents, they believe that there is a divine creator, and they very respect and practice the norms of the culture in their daily living. The values of Nore Kore means sisterhood. The values of Nabua Kabua means loving and caring. The values of Nabume Kabume means empowerment. It's about equality and unity. So my great-grandparents, they have been living in harmony with the nature, and also they really respect other living creatures, and they value mountain as their mother who produce life to the living creatures. So to me, my great-grandparents and the indigenous people around the world, they are the true guardian of this Mother Earth. So when the settler arrived in the land of Papua, they said that sorry, I just want to say this picture. They said that Papuan way of living, it's uncivilized, it's savage, primitive. That's what they said. These people are godless, and our traditional spiritual practices are stigmatized as animism. Our traditional attire viewed as a symbol of poverty and backwardness. And also we were forced to live in a new type of house and setting. And hectares of sago. Sago is a staple food for the people who are living in a coastal area. So hectares of a sago forest in Merauke, for example, replaced by a rice field, and also millions of trees are dried out due to the tailing disposal from the Freeport McMoran, the gold mining, the largest gold mining company in Tembagapura, one of the highland region in Timika. Just want the third picture, please. So these are the island of Papua from Sorong to Samarai. The Great Britain and Germany took over the eastern part of the island, and then they got independence in 1975. But while the western part under Dutch colony, so they divided us according to their own interest, just as they did to the African continent. So US, they want to obtain the natural wealth, especially gold, in Mount Nemangkawi, where the Freeport McMoran exists now. So under the President Kennedy administrative, they initiated a New York Agreement on August 1962 to facilitate the transfer of power over West Papua from Netherlands to Indonesia. And then in 1st May of 1963, from UNTEA, United Nations Temporary Executive Authority, to Indonesia. This time was given legitimate to Indonesia to deploy its army, troops, police and army in a large number into the island of Papua. But I want to stress, I want to focus in, as you mentioned, Intan, before that, in 1969, that's the very historic moment where Act of Free Choice or Penentuan Pendapat Rakyat, PEPERA, was held. But actually, for us indigenous Papuan, the process was under intimidation, and also the result was manipulated. So it's only 1,026 people choose to be with Indonesia because the process were under intimidation. But the very important here is 2 years before the Act of Free Choice, in 1967, the Freeport McMoran, the largest gold mining company owned by United States, they already had the contract with Indonesia state to have this exploration started without any involvement of the Amume people, the people who own the land, who own the Mount Nemangkawi. So yeah, that's from my perspective, that that in the name of civilization, development, even Christianity, they did political conspiracy for their economic interest. So we are still struggling. We are still fighting to get the right for self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rode. I think the story about Freeport really taking advantage of this settler colonialism reminds us of what Amira says about the role of the global community. In a way, we are all implicated here. And you mentioned about how colonialism is justified through the narrative of civilizing the people of Papua, development. So narrative is also very important in justifying settler colonialism. I'll go back to you with more questions, but now I will move on to Sara. Thank you so much for being here. So Sara, both of us live in Gadigal land, and whenever people talk about settler colonialism, they often cite this famous maxim by Australian anthropologist Patrick Wolfe. And Wolfe says, invasion is a structure, not an event. In other words, colonialism is not just a historical event that has ceased in the past. So maybe you can tell us from the Australian perspective, but also from the Arab Australian perspective, how do settler colonial structures continue to shape the Australian society today?
Thank you so much, Intan, for that very comprehensive question. And before I begin, I too would like to echo your acknowledgements that I am currently so privileged to be on Gadigal land, to be safe and to be looked after thanks to the nurturing of the custodians of this land since time immemorial. And with that, I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and affirm my ongoing commitment to Indigenous justice here in Australia on stolen land. I'd also like to take this chance to make a few remarks with regards to the question that you asked, and to say that firstly, for me personally, and for our movement here, we understand as Palestinians that there is no liberation in Palestine without liberation for First Nations here. And when I say that, I hope that each of us can reflect on those words and what we are doing for the struggle here, beyond just the symbols and beyond the lip service, I think is important. And I want to quickly quote Indigenous Muslim woman Eugenia Flynn and Palestinian activist Tasneem Samak, who write on the shared decolonial struggle. Together, Black Australians and Palestinians share a history and reality of erasure that has lasted far beyond the anti-colonial era of the early last century, when most colonized peoples gained independence from colonial powers. Both Black Australia and Palestine are yet to experience liberation in self-determination, governance, and sovereignty. Many of you might have heard of the twins, Muhammad and Mona al-Kurd, who are residents in Sheikh Jarrah in the neighborhood in East Jerusalem, who have managed to capture the world's attention. Muhammad and the residents have been fighting with their phones and everything else that they have, which is really not much in the face of the mighty military in the boots, to keep the homes that they've lived in for generations from being stolen by Israeli settlers, as Amira said, and settlers who are enabled by the colonial Israeli state and a discriminatory judicial system. And when Muhammad was asked in the last months, as this surge across the world kind of took place, he was asked, how do people help? How do we help you? How do we donate? How do we support you? His response was that we don't want your donations. This is not a humanitarian situation. This is a political one, which means that money is just a band-aid. What we need to understand are systems. And in order to do that, we need to understand how politics works, how protesting works, how pressuring your governments, changing the parameters of the conversation works, and how building networks of solidarity also works, which is ultimately one of the biggest pieces, I think, of this puzzle. So today, in response to your question, I need to foreground my answer in a few things. Firstly, we need to be drawing parallels between different global social justice movements, whether as a Muslim myself, as the moral imperative demands of me, and because importantly, it's about making this struggle, understanding that the struggle is not unique and it's not new. So exceptionalizing Palestine actually does us a disservice. Saying that it is intractable or complicated or it's endless means that there's no solution. So we know that Israel maintains a regime of settler colonialism and apartheid and occupation, and that none of these things are new. They've occurred throughout history, and empires have crumbled and countries around the world have been decolonized, except in the circumstances, as we said, from West Papua to so-called Australia to Palestine. So in Australia, we are settlers, and where we have not fought, myself or yourself, Intan, and others in our communities, where we have remained silent, it means that we have been complicit in that violence. And we as settlers benefit from the proximity to whiteness, you know, despite the fact that we, of course, are subjected to anti-Asian hate and racism and Islamophobia and massive surveillance of our communities and the policing of our communities, as we know, especially post 9/11. So having said all that, the reason I need to position myself here is so that people can understand that I am a daughter of dispossession. You know, my family has been exiled, and I'm here on stolen land, complicit in dispossession. So drawing parallels between these movements and these, I guess, these identities means that we need to shed light on the commonality of our struggles. And it shows that ultimately, as Palestinians, that our freedom and our liberation is inherently intertwined with the freedom and liberation of other movements around the world. So if you call yourself pro-Palestine, it means that you are, it necessitates that you are pro-Black Lives Matter, that you are pro-refugee rights, that you're pro the environment, and of course here on stolen land, that you are committed to First Nations justice. And I think the windows that we're seeing right now are in large part because actually of the global conversations on race and power, thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement and First Nations justice movement. Very quickly, I wanted to also draw from NARM, or Melbourne-based Palestinian scholar Michaela Sahar, who writes, "The tenets of Black Lives Matter are amplifying the struggles of Palestinians and making them more visible and understandable to a global audience." So just as BLM is forcing a reckoning with systemic racism, there is also new attention being paid to the origins of the Palestinian struggle. So we can understand now these terms and frameworks such as settler colonialism, such as asymmetric power relations and racial discrimination by virtue of this very movement. And we saw that while Gaza was being attacked months ago, it was First Nations, indigenous communities here, and Palestinian activists standing here together, demanding an end to colonialism wherever it occurs. And also, I should say, indigenous West Papuan, Black, Afro-Black, and First Nations. And in Palestine, we know that there are murals memorializing George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. In the US, BLM stood in solidarity with Palestine. So none of this should be coming as a surprise to us, that these are strengthening bonds. And of course, on the flip side, when Israeli and US police cooperate internationally on training and weapons, when they profit in mutual war and security and terror economies, that demands transnational solidarity and cooperation and response. We know that Australia engages in arms deals with Israel. We know that it supports Israeli businesses and trade that are involved in the forced expansion of illegal settlements in Palestine, Israeli settlements. And we know that it is unlawful to be involved in these arms deals because our public money is basically going directly to war crimes and to settlements. So even in Australia, with its own colonial history, we are directly complicit, and we have a role to play to stop that. And to be honest, knowing our history, it actually helps us arrive at the understanding that these are parallel settler colonial logics. These are parallel settler colonial psyches operating in this nation and in Israel. So of course, Australia's support for Israel is logical and inevitable. And as a nation that continues to dispossess, violate and exploit its own indigenous communities. So I suppose that we already know Australia and Israel's very long list of crimes and what we are up against. But I think it is imperative for us to know that this is really hard work, being able to make these connections, and that it doesn't stop, that it is lifelong commitment for us to do this between the headlines and when no one is watching, and that we can and should be, should understand our collective power, because without our communal connections, without our shared struggles, there is no liberation, just as Audre Lorde would say, temporary armistice. So I want to leave on a hopeful note and say that we do need to be unwavering and unapologetic and courageous in our fight, and we need to oppose every oppressive apartheid wall, detention center, checkpoint, and policy that seeks to dispossess and erase and silence marginalized individuals. Everything that is meant to divide and exclude and oppress and create suspicion is what we need to be up against, fighting unapologetically. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful. I've noted a couple of points here, but maybe I'll share those points later. But I would like to highlight how our struggle is intertwined with other struggles. So it means that if we are pro-Palestine, that means we also need to pay attention to what's happening with the First Nations in Australia, with the struggle in Papua, with the environment. I really like that point. And I also like your point about how we complicit to silence. And I guess this is my next question before we move on to the Q&A with the audience. So I guess we all need to be aware, to be critical of ourselves, of how we might complicit to power structures. But I guess all of you here, I must say, you have done important things in your capacity as an academic, as an activist, a poet, and even working with the church. So I would like to perhaps it would be great if you could share what you do as an academic, as an activist, a poet, what you do to sort of resist the settler colonial logics with your work. Maybe we can move the order. Maybe we can start with Rode now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in the midst of ongoing crimes against humanity here in Papua, many of the religious leaders remain silent. Even to be honest, some of the church leaders compromise with the government, and it's only few that stand up and speak on behalf of the congregation. So it was led by Reverend Dr. Beni Giai. He's the moderator of West Papua Council of Churches, and along with the other 4 pastors. Personally, I was really inspired by him, his teaching. He's really, he always contextualized the scripture of the Bible into the reality of our daily life. So in 2013, when I entrusted as a coordinator for Women Department, together with amazing ladies, we started actually it is just a small beginning, a small group of discussion where we name that process is storytelling in a circle. So we start to read the scripture and questioning ourselves. Does these scriptures really speak into my daily life? So, for example, one day we read chapter 13, verse 1 to 2. It says that submit to government because authority that exists is appointed by God. So resist the authority. Resist the ordinance of God. So this scripture doesn't. We disagree with this scripture. So we start to reflect, and as we start to asking ourselves, a woman in the group start to ask. Rode, if government is the representative of God on earth, then why the government do nothing when the army, when the police rain down the bullets and destroy our gardens and our homes, and even the church were bombed? Does really the government the representative of God on earth? And it's really complete. I cannot answer. We all just kept quiet, and we start to go in a deep discussion that we start to ask and wonder the divine creator from our Christian perspective, that the divine creator, he emptied himself and he became human in Jesus Christ. And why Jesus Christ didn't came through the lineage of the Roman Caesar, the Caesar of Roman, or why Jesus Christ didn't came through the lineage of the Pharisees, the religious leader. They are the power holders. But why Jesus chose to came through an ordinary Palestinian family? So we are still in the process of learning to read the Bible scriptures by using our own glasses. Yeah, I think maybe I'll stop here.
Yeah. I think it's really important because to decolonize the Bible, because whether it's the Bible or the Quran in Indonesia, these are the holy books that where we can see narratives that are used to justify oppression, right? So what we need to do is really, question all these dominant narratives. Thank you, Kak Rode. And then maybe we will move on to Sarah and then Amira.
Thanks, Intan. I think, well, to answer your question, I do wear a couple of quote unquote hijabs. That's my lame dad joke out of the way. But one of the things that I will talk about is I guess the poetry in the art space, in addition to being a campaigner on Palestine and on, as you mentioned, refugee rights and basically racial justice is probably how I would frame it or call it, particularly here again in Australia on stolen land. Beyond that, I'm also a poet. And I wanted to just mention that very quickly because I think so often when we are asked, what are you fighting against? What are you trying to dismantle? We're very good at naming what we are opposed to, but not so good at articulating what we're fighting for or what we're trying to build, what we're trying to create. And so what are we saying yes to? What are the worlds that we're imagining and how are we coming together to create that? And so I think for me, art is one way and poetry is one way to do the thinking, to create language, to express, to be able to invite people into worlds where they are understanding the misheard or the mistranslated or the silenced and the quote unquote, I guess, vulnerable. So for me, it's about being able to use that language and use that space to spur people into meaningful action, because once you're able to have that thought process, you understand the purpose and you're able to then take meaningful action. And I guess what I'm trying to say is imagination is really vital, foundational to any sort of transformative politics at the root of the other kind of campaigning and other work that we do. So it is quite linked for me. And on top of that, as a poet who has a responsibility to my community and to the fact that I am a settler on stolen land, it means that I'm really wanting to, and part of a movement that is about creating spaces. So how do we keep creating windows and opening doors for people to join these artistic, decolonized artistic movements that are self-determined by us, not managed and dictated and controlled by, you know, I guess the institutions and the powers that be, and you know, of course, the Australian white fantasy. So how do we get people to join? How do we uplift others in the face of an exceptionalism and a neoliberalism that forces us to think otherwise, that wants us to compete for scraps and undermine and divide and conquer each other, you know, so to speak. So I'm not really interested in being the face of multicultural Australian success. I'm not interested in being a good Muslim. I'm not interested in one or two of us making it in that, you know, maladjusted society. What I'm interested in is a movement within our communities that are connected to each other and that are about nurturing each other to be able to tackle these fundamental issues that we discussed earlier around social justice and how we achieve that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. So a lot of people in the audience are, because we are based in arts and culture, I'm a writer, and then we have people from film and theater background as the organizers. So a lot of our people in the audience here are writers and artists. And I think it's really important what you're saying about, you know, how to language or arts as a way of inviting people to understand the mistranslated, because mistranslations do happen, and the importance of decolonizing the arts movement. That's really important. So who makes the decision, right, in the arts world? Okay, so thank you. And then Amira, so tell us more about your work and how you you use that to question or to resist power structures. Oh, sorry, you're still muted. Yeah.
So I'm an academic. There are limits. It's an institution, an establishment. It goes with the logic of, if not colonialism, then capitalism at least. So it's a modern institution. It cannot do it. But in the same time, you know, we try to find those places, those, you know, gaps or little spaces where you can speak of those things that are usually not spoken of, or not point at least to the silences. As Césaire said, that the colonizers, the colonized power over their colonizer is that they know they are lying. But the problem becomes of how do you speak of the truth. You can actually point to the lies, but it is much harder to find the truth, because, you know, every project that claims truth is actually going to end up into some kind of an oppressive project in the end. So my work has focused more on those voices and silences of the colonized, of trying to find that thing that Toni Morrison called some kind of truth, that truth that is always filled with what Sarah was talking about, imagination, and opening that space for imagination. For if what capitalism has done is put a limit, put a wall on the final point, on their destination where all people should reach or should strive to reach. And then I think what we can do is go with Toni Morrison, go with Audre Lorde, and think of how can we imagine different different spaces, different ways of being, different ways of knowing. And so I try to do that thing with Lorde that you can that Césaire did, that Morrison tried to do, is Ghassan Kanafani talked about as well. It's just not with the colonized, it's not only about oppressed women, but also like there are the feminine writers, let's say, like Kanafani or Najil Ali, those who are outside the system and try to find those spaces, that those gaps, those little openings from where you can speak differently and know the word in a different way, and yani, hoping that these can actually become a larger space where they connect in a certain way, they link to each other because they link with the Black experience in the US, they link with South Africa, they link with people of the land in the US or in Australia, New Zealand, and even with those groups of people oppressed in Europe itself or in the West. And then they create that. I don't believe in one homogeneous struggle, but then you believe in links. You make the links and you find the links. And actually where those links are created are never on the surface. When they're on the surface, we're back into the international community and its agencies. But those links that are much deeper, that are not very obvious and cannot really be defined, but they can be first felt. And this is why poetry is important. This is why art is important, because it is through art and poetry that you, or poetic language at least, that you can find those spaces and those links. Again, language may fail us. Language most of the time fails us, but in a way, in a certain way, with a poetic image, with a certain word, you can actually find those links. And this is what I've been focusing on in my work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for underlining those little gaps. I think it's really hard to escape this structure completely, but it's really important to, like what you're saying, imagine different spaces, different ways of being, and really trying to, because if we don't have that imagination, we don't have hope. So let's keep finding all those little gaps. So let's take some questions from the audience. The first question. All right, so I guess in terms of, this is related to the idea of donation, because I think we talked about how, just simply donating won't work. So this is from Trisha. So is there any community or organization where I can spare my time and energy to spread the political awareness in regards to settler colonialism, especially in Indonesia? I always wanted to contribute in the larger aspect, knowing donation won't work. So perhaps we can ask Rode first, because this is the Indonesian context, but I think it's an important question for Amira and Sara in terms of how do we use our time and energy. Maybe Rode can start.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very good question, especially as Papuan, to see that this question comes from Indonesian. So I really appreciate that. I think I also want to take this opportunity to really appreciate the initiative of Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, because I think this is one of the effective ways to create a space for the truth to be heard, and also to shrinking the narrative gap. So I want to say that please, maybe it's just a simple answer, that please share the true history of Papuan to your family, to your friends, especially to your children. Maybe that on a personal level, but in a different level, you can also share your resources in terms of the network of a training, because we really do need training in a capacity building for a diplomacy training program, or training in media, how we could share the true history of Papua through, like, I'm deeply humbled that I can have an opportunity to listen from Sara and Amira, especially how to write a poem or how to create a song, or even make a short documentary about what's going on in Papua, and then we can share to the civil society in Indonesia. But then maybe in another level, you could write to your government that what the policies, almost most of the policies that decided by the Indonesian government are the bias migrant policies, as Reverend Dr. Benikie always said. So, and especially, could you please just write to your government about the military operation that's still going on here? So, yeah, maybe that's all for now. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sara and Amira, do you want to add? How do we use our time and energy to spread political awareness in regards to settler colonialism?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond quickly. Just building off of what Rode said, I think that, you know, it is the questioner mentioned donations. Of course, you know, you can make a tangible material difference via donations, but so can other resources, skills, and time to organizations, whether locally on the ground or elsewhere. And so, yes, by all means, donate to relief, because that is a priority, but also support the vital sort of local and global advocacy efforts. That's fundamental to any cause. So, you know, on an individual and community level, we need to educate ourselves, quite obviously, as we are doing here today, and we need to be able to center and amplify the appropriate, you know, the voices that are at the heart of the different causes and issues. And, you know, we need to have difficult conversations about things such as West Papua. And you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of support for in Indonesia for Palestine. Well, if there's support for Palestine, then surely the logical connection would be, you know, what is happening in West Papua. So using that as a window to have these conversations, and again, it's slow and it's difficult and it's, you know, it's tricky, but you have privilege. Everyone in this e-room has privilege relative to someone else and is able to have these conversations in classrooms, in workplaces, around the dinner table, and also upskill yourself. Rode mentioned again that being able to capacity build is important, supporting others in doing that and doing it yourself. So there's no shortage of, you know, media and social media and digital kinds of training online and connecting through others, you know, across the world. It's possible. You know, we've seen that even with how powerful the mobile phones can be in the face of boots and guns. So we've got the ability to connect. We should be able to do that. We should be helping each other and supporting each other, write letters and tweet and lobby our leaders. And so, yeah, I know that the Australian system is obviously different to Indonesia, but you have leaders that are religious, that are political. You can let them know that you feel strongly about these things. Let them know that you're watching. Let them earn their leadership, and that they shouldn't be complacent, because Palestine reflects popular opinion, and so should West Papua and other issues that are about, you know, ongoing oppression and injustice. So, you know, I often say, to serve the community, to save the community, sorry, we need to serve the community. And that's what this is about here. So I can't overemphasize this enough. We do have more power than we think. And we should be able to build coalitions with each other, and borders aren't going to stop that. And we need to be able to draw on the parallels, as I mentioned earlier. Lastly, with regards to Palestine, I think, and again, trying to adapt this to our local contexts. We have the boycott, divestment, sanction global movement, which is about an economic cost. It's about making the occupation, the Israeli occupation, hurt. So when we talk about that, we're talking about targeted consumer boycotts. So if BDS, the global BDS and BDS Australia websites, they outline how you can boycott businesses and who you should boycott, so that and academic institutions and cultural institutions, to be able to raise awareness about the injustice and to be able to have, like, to make a actual structural difference. what I will say, and I'll finish on this, is that even though there are businesses that are not on the boycott list, for example, we as individuals have a duty to be more ethical in our consumption. And that means that that extends beyond Palestine. And when I say ethical in our consumption, I understand that there is no, moral purity, moral consumption under capitalism, but within the limited kind of power that we have, it's important not for us to be as ethical as possible, which means that, when you think about what's happening in China to the Muslim Uyghur population, think about where you're buying your clothes from, think about the fact, or whatever else you might be buying, how that is supporting businesses that might be, or Chinese specifically owned businesses that are complicit. And so what I'm saying is BDS Palestine is linked to being ethical across different areas of our lives. And that means that we do have the ability to make a difference even in these small ways.
Thank you, Sarah. Amira, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a little note. I think also we need to think of strategies and means of doing things that are, I go with Lord Yani, the master tools cannot actually undo the master's house, so they cannot destroy it. I think we have to think of our ways. I think the real resistance comes from doing things differently. And I do, if we're talking culture, if we're talking knowledge or consciousness, I think it can be done through stories. The grandmother story, the way that the story is not something that is established, that is finished. And so it can be always renewed. It can always be added to. It can maybe sleep for a while and then come back to life and then think. And because stories go deep inside us, they don't leave us, but they actually form and shape the way we think about things and the way we behave. And so if we're even thinking of being ethical in a different way, that is not the legal, the law-based kind of ethics and limited actually kind of ethics, then I think, and not only going with material or economic kind of, again, the whole instrumentalist, rationalist, capitalist way of thinking about things, but actually thinking about us as human beings, about our lives, and then but again, it is about being against every form of oppression. And so I agree with Sarah. If you're against every form of oppression, against anything that is wrong, but not the wrong defined by the law, then the wrong that you feel and know for yourself that is wrong, then you can be actually in different ways in solidarity with Palestine when you're against the poor not getting their vaccination, when you're against hunger, when you're against the devastation of the environment. It all comes back to Palestine or to Papua or to Australia. So I think this is the way. Palestine is a colonial, central colonial capitalist problem. It is that. And so it is connected with so many similar problems across the world. And so it's each time we take an instance against that, we are actually in solidarity with Palestine.
Thank you, Amira. So the next question is, I guess I'll just address this to Sarah, since you were talking, you talked about educate yourself. And this is from Tommy, who is a Chinese minority in Indonesia. And then his question is, how do we teach, this is from the perspective of parents, how do we teach an awareness of oppression of a system? And also, how do we decolonize the history that has marginalized minority from history? Because that's what's happening to Chinese minority in Indonesia. So basically, this is about how the young generation learns more about this. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that obviously this kind of ties into what we were saying before around being part of and building communities so that we may be able to have these shared knowledges and exchanges between each other. And then so I think, and this goes back to the importance of of poetry and art and storytelling and language, being able to create that thought and having that be the counter or the alter to the mainstream narratives, the fabrications that are being told, the myths. So I think it's definitely something that has been happening for quite a while now. There are communities that are at the forefront of this, that are at the forefront of countering and offering the alternatives, the alter spaces, I should call them, as opposed, because, it's important to understand that we don't just, exist. I say this, we don't exist in opposition. I'm not the opposite of white. I don't exist through that gaze or that lens. So it's about coming together and connecting and having our shared histories and our storytelling reflect the truths that are so often missing from the conversation. So we need to be part of these communities. We need to be part of these connections, and they are happening. And if, we might not be seeing them, you might not be seeing them, but they're definitely there. You just need to be able to go to those spaces and kind of connect, I suppose, in that way. And again, it's growing. There are communities that are at the forefront of this, and we need to be able to understand that they're there. And if they're invisible, that's deliberate, that's political, that's part of the erasure. So, and I really, I appreciate that question, because I think it goes to the heart of what we're saying, that we need to be able to center the voices of the communities that are at the heart of these oppressions. And that though language can limit, it can also liberate, in that it can make you feel things. And Amira said earlier, there's an importance of feeling what is wrong. That's your consciousness, and you need to be able to take action on that. So everyone needs to take responsibility for deconstructing their privilege, and what that looks like, unlearning, unknowing, and questioning. And so, you've come to the right place. This is a first step, and being able to know that and do that is part of building our culture that is not exclusionary, that is based on the generosity of spirit and love that we've, that some of the artists that we've mentioned here today have articulated. And it means that it also means ultimately that you don't have the luxury to stay silent in that education, because now that you need to make sure that you are doing everything that you can to fight these oppressions and not stay silent or comfortable.
Thank you so much, Sara. So there's a couple of questions, but I'm just going to pick one because of the time limit. So there are some questions about what we can do to support people in Papua. I think that has been answered by Rode, and then what's going on in Papua. I think you can, if there's anything that you want to add, Rode, maybe at the end, you can elaborate more in terms of what Indonesians need to know. But I would also suggest that for those of you who are not in the process of educating yourself what's going on in Papua, please do look at our previous classes, our previous events at Thalassa. Yesterday, Elstineke Rike Kapmo talked about colonialism in Papua as well, so you can have a look. So the last question, which is actually my prepared question, I'm glad that Filza asked us this question. This is about solidarity. So I'm just going to read this. How to build feminist solidarity amidst the narrative of global citizen, which tends to annihilate particularity in connection to the universal context. Yeah, that's great. Moreover, the systematic inequality resulted from capitalism, for instance, happens anywhere. So how to build solidarity without falling into the trap of universalizing narratives that sort of dampen political statements. So who would like to answer? Maybe we can go to Amira, and then Sara, and then Rode.
I think, with what happened in Palestine, and all the solidarity that was seen, and what happened with George Floyd last year, I think when it is people feeling that what happened to others is something that happened to them, this is where solidarity starts. And so I think that, again, and their reaction and the way they express that solidarity, it's something that happens with them. It's not calculated or rationalized. It just happens because they feel that this injustice is very similar or very close to what they have been experiencing. And so I think this is the real basis for any solidarity of the oppressed.
Mm. Thank you. And then Sara?
Thanks. I mean, this is a really big question, and I suppose one that I haven't really, I don't really have a sort of neat answer for you. I think that this is an ongoing issue. I mean, just months ago, again, we were talking about Palestine, and one of the things that really was devastating to see was the silence, particularly from a lot of privileged and prominent white women here in Australia, and it really spoke to that failure on their part in terms of understanding the connections and understanding what intersectional feminism is. And I often wonder, what is the quota? How many Palestinian women and people need to die before they see us as actual humans, before they see us as worthy and deserving of that kind of, of speaking out for us? And how many women have to be detained in Australia in detention centers? How many women across the world in various capacities, how much of their labor needs to be exploited in places where we know that women are barely given a living wage, for instance. So there's all these examples, I think, and instances where we know and we cannot say that we don't know that this is happening. And so if you position yourself as a feminist but are silent, then you're simply on these issues, then you're simply whitewashing. It's not, it's a deliberate, violent whitewashing of these experiences. And this speaks to a real gap in their feminism, to be honest with you. And that's exactly why, we're talking about the annihilation of a particularity. This is also about how it serves them in their position, this is how power works. It perpetuates them in their positions. It perpetuates and serves them to stay silent and to be able to I guess keep that power and not cede it to us. So I guess ultimately what I would say for me and my personal experience is that I am someone who has learned and is learning and owes a lot to particularly Black and Black Indigenous feminism, a Black Indigenous and Black queer feminism, liberation feminism here on stolen land and globally. And that's where my sort of politics comes from. And again, this is in progress. So I think that for me, I would say to you is that if you have that as your, centering and learning from those voices and understanding their, their takes on systemic inequalities and their takes on decolonization and what feminism looks like. And one perfect example is, hang on, let me bring it up. This was not on purpose, but I did have this next to my bedside. This is a brilliant resource to look to, is where I would start. With that, I think this will give you answers way more and in a much better way than I can ever do right now.
Yeah, so let's take notes of Eileen Morton Robinson talking up to the white woman. Thank you for bringing that up. And then finally, Rode, you have something to say about the global solidarity?
Yeah, I think it is a great need, and it's truly important to have a global solidarity. But I don't know, I just want to start with that question comes to myself also. Like I ask myself, am I really ready to listen? The pain, the truth, the reality of the people that I'm going to have solidarity with him or her. Because for me, solidarity without action, it will not bring impact. I'm saying not a big impact, but it will start with a small beginning. It is very a good question that I ask to myself also. To be honest, I don't have an answer, but if I ask myself, am I really ready to give my time to listen? And after listen, do I able to stepping out from my comfort zone? And then am I really, I will take a chance to really reconstruct my belief and in building this networking and solidarity. If it's challenged my faith, do I able to step from my comfort zone? To be honest, I don't have an answer, but that question comes to myself, and I just want to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's really important. So what does it mean to listen, right? And what does it mean to listen carefully? Thank you. I would like, I have so many things on my notebook here. So we've talked about, I think my summary doesn't do justice to just the complexity of issues, but we've talked about the importance of storytelling, and how stories can always be renewed, as Amira said, that we need to intervene in the creation of narratives and the dominant narratives that frame our ways of seeing things. And then we've talked about all those, little gaps, what Amira said, and in small beginnings. This is something from Rode. So start small and find cracks, and we can work with that. But we need to keep pushing and imagining. And then we talked about how oppressions are intertwined with each other. So it's not either or, right? It's not oppression Olympics. So if you are pro-Palestine, then you would support struggles of the Black people in the US, the Black people in Papua, and how I really like this point about how, feminists question your feminism if you are not, if you are silent against colonialism. So any last statements from the speakers? Maybe just 1 or 2 minutes.
Can I
yeah,
start
Rode?
first?
Yes.
Amira and Sara, it is a huge privilege for me to be able to listen from you, Amira and Sara. I had a friend, Sami Awad. He's the founder of Holy Land Trust. And I went to Bethlehem, and it's an eye-opening opportunity for me because I just shocked. Bethlehem, it was in Palestine. And I just want to say thank you very much. The key words from you, Amira, that the grandmother story. And from you, Sara, to save the community is to serve the community. And being a shalom, being a peace activist in the midst of militarization operation, racism, it's structural racism and systemic injustice. It is indeed a real struggle, but it must be a path that I should take to gain a true solidarity to tear down the oppressive system. So thank you very much, Intan. Thank you for creating a space so that I can share the pain of my nation. Wah, wah, wah.
Thank you. Amira and Sara, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I also want to say thank you for making those links. It's actually great to be with you, even Sara and Rode. It is one way, and it is we're all women and we're speaking as women, but then with the whole question of solidarity and links, I think it is how one sees oneself. And if our womanhood is not a prison, that we're imprisoning ourselves in it, it's actually the place of our difference, and the place of difference as a place of freedom, as a place of wanting and insisting of being different. And even any feeling that to be a woman is to be in the margin. And then that is the place where we start to be in solidarity with all these people who are in the margin. So yes, thank you for organizing this.
Thank you. Sara?
Yeah, no, I think that there's really not much I can say beyond that, except to add that this is where the transformation happens, the transformational relationships and the politics, and then the building beyond that. This is exactly what I mean, and this epitomizes when I say alter spaces, being able to come together and imagine together what that looks like and what our starting points are. So thank you very much. The honor is all mine, believe me. And just to add, to say that if ever you make it onto this side of the world, you always have a place to stay. You are very welcome here, and I hope that I can crash your couch one day. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Amira, Rode, and Sara, for all of your eye-opening and really, really incisive thoughts. It's an honor for us to have you all here. And may I, respond to Rode? Wah. Thank you so much, Rode. And many thanks to Rani Alsanti for translating to Indonesian language, and to JBI for translating to Indonesian Sign Language. I hope this forum allows us to learn more, to listen. That's a key word for today, from each other, and to continue to find paths for solidarity. So our next session of Etalase is called Manifesto Mama, or Mama's Manifesto, where we'll hear two activists from Sumba stating their manifesto about sexual violence in relation to indigenous customs in Nusa Tenggara, East Indonesia. Stay tuned. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you.